article. This article is by Jill Barchet of the Hechinger Report, and it is called Nearly One Half of Parents Don't Want Their Kids to Go Straight to a Four-Year College. Very interesting article. It was based on a poll that came out in Gallup this year, April 7th, 2021. And this poll was done by the Carnegie Corporation, a very well-respected nonprofit organization. So, Mark, let me just give a brief summary and we'll talk about it.
Sure.
And basically, it said that 46% of the parents in their poll would prefer for their kids not to go to a four-year college. And they thought that this was a warning for the support for college education. Now, this poll had 3,000 adults with kids aged 18 to 25. And they said, what were some of the reasons that the parents gave that they didn't want their kids to go to college? Well, number one, rising tuition. Number two, disappointing graduation rates of colleges today. And number three, poor job prospects. And they said in lieu of the four-year training, 60% would prefer their kids to have non-college vocational training, and 22% preferred that their kids would either A, start a business, B, join the military, or C, do something in terms of community outreach. And it was very interesting because they found that there were some differences racially. Black parents, 67% of them still had faith in the college process. But among Hispanics, that dropped to 56%. And shockingly, Mark, among whites, it dropped to 51%. And just let me make a couple more points. Politically, not surprisingly, among Democrats, 70% still wanted their kids to go to college. But among independents, it dropped to 48%. Among Republicans, it dropped to 46%. So there's much more in this article, Mark, but let me stop here and see where you want to take this, because I can see there's multiple jumping off points that we can take right now to discuss this.
It really is. I mean, Dave and I literally could talk about this article for literally hours. It's, it's so nuanced and so it makes so many points. But let me start by saying this. I was a little naive about a trend until a few years ago. So your regular listeners know I'm Director of College Counseling at KIPP, which is the nation's largest charter school network. And that's an acronym that stands for Knowledge is Power program. And so we're at a KIPP staff meeting, and we had a president from Clark Atlanta University at our staff meeting. And this is an elderly lady with literally over 50 years of education experience. So she startled me at first by making a comment, and she says, this new generation is unlike anything that we've seen before. This is pre-pandemic, by the way. So this is probably 3 years ago. She says, they want to work from home. They do not want to be in the office all the time. So in the past, she said, I could say, hey, everybody in the office, we're going to make calls at 7 at night. No, they don't want to do that. She said they value work-life balance. And they look at how hard people from my generation have worked, and they say, that's unhealthy. I'm not interested. And I've actually, now that I have 25 and 22-year-olds, I'm starting to see some of these trends with my own kids. I look at my own daughter, Karis. Dave knows this. She's got a Spanish degree and a Spanish tutoring business. She actually had since she was in high school, 2012. And she is also a certified medical interpreter. So she had this opportunity to have what I thought was an amazing job, working with a doctor's clinic. There were like doctors, dentists, physical therapists there. And basically, she'd rotate around amongst the office and be the certified medical interpreter so that they didn't have to know Spanish. And she could use and she had to learn all the medical terms and interpret them in Spanish. And then she turns the job down. At first, this is a real gut check as a parent. I'm like, didn't you go to school to do all this for that? And she's like, I don't want to be a corporate slave. She's like, I want to be an entrepreneur. And so she's like, I learned from you. But then she says, but I don't want to work 7 days a week like you work. I'm going to the gym 6 days a week, and I'm taking Sundays off. And so I get to see like this new generation, how they think different, and it's trickling also into the parents. Now, one thing I'll say, and this is like you say, there's so many places we could go with this, Dave. One thing, I'll just make a comment. I don't want to hang our hat here too long, but one thing that hit me was the almost unprecedented challenge that admissions officers have right now because of a confluence of factors that are all coming at them at the same time. So they've got the demographic cliff. I mean, it truly is a buyer's market right now. And college is under so much pressure to have full enrollment. So you got the demographic cliff, which we've talked about before. After 2025, there's going to be less 18-year-olds, so less people for the colleges to get if they're going after traditional students. They've got thousands of competitors already just in the four-year schools that are out there. The U.S. has so many colleges compared to other countries. So thousands and thousands of competitors. But then what this article deals with is probably, the biggest challenge of all, which is the perception that what is being offered isn't that valuable and may not be worth it. The ROI may not be there because it's such an expensive proposition. And the reality is there's actually some truth in the short term to that. So one of the things that this article says, and I'll read a quote, it says, in the short term, the 2-year associate's degree and the training certificate are better financial bets. It says over the first decade, the return on investment for a 2-year degree was $141,000, followed by a certificate of $120,000, and the 4-year degree had a return of $71,000. Now, the article does go on to say over the long term, it's unmistakable that the bachelor's degree, the ROI is there. It shows the research that, almost $1 million difference in career earnings for a bachelor's versus a high school diploma. But there's some truth to it in that regard. So that's a little bit of background. Now let's get into some of the things you mentioned, Dave. Let's do a breakdown of what is it that people actually do want. So as Dave said, 46% of parents said they would prefer to not send their child directly to a four-year college. And the thing that's so fascinating about this article is they tracked it amongst different income categories. It says even if there were no financial obstacles or other obstacles at all, they still feel that way, which is a way of saying that they don't see the value. They think there's better value in other alternatives. And when we look at the breakdown, well, what is it that they want if they don't want college? So we have 54% that want the 4-year degree. Okay. 8% want the 2-year degree. 16% want non-college training, and 22% want alternative pathways. So if we combine the 16% non-college training with the 22% alternative pathways, we're talking about almost 40% of people are looking for some type of alternative education. And the article goes on to say, remember, they surveyed over 3,000 people. What was it that people want? Well, let's take a look at that 22%. That's a big number who want alternative pathways. Starting a business, extremely popular. This is this gig economy that we're in. Joining the military, getting a job right out of college, or doing community service were the 4 things that people mention. But Dave, let's you asked me where I want to take it. You gave your preamble, your overview. I gave mine. I think where I'd like to take this is let's look at these various divides and let's talk about why they may or may not exist. So let's start out right away with the political divide, which is the first one they mentioned. So 70% of Democrats want their kid to go to 4-year college right out of high school, and actually 11% want 2-year college. So if you add the 70 and if you add the 4-year and the 2, you have 81% of Democrats that want to see students go to college directly out of high school. For Republicans, those numbers were 46% for a 4-year degree and 7%. So that's 53%. So you're talking about 82 versus 53. You're talking about basically a 30-point gap. So my question for you is, why do you feel there's such a political divide between what Democratic parents want for their kid versus Republican parents want for their kids?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that in all these categories where you look at the racial divide, political divide, education divide, and geographic divide, they're all consistent. So it makes sense because we know, for example, that most Democrats are in the suburban area, and actually that's where more people are for college. Education-wise, we know there's a big gap between Democrats being more highly educated than Republicans. And of course, we see less educated people less inclined to go to college. And ironically, we see that more Democrats are African American and more Republicans are white. So you're seeing more African Americans as Democrats being predisposed to college. So there is a similarity, commonality between all these statistical categories. So that's one thing. It makes sense between geography, education, political, and racial preferences. That being said, I also think that when you look at the value proposition of college, where does college really give the biggest bang for your buck? In urban, diverse geographical areas, right? Because if you're going to college and you're becoming a lawyer or a doctor, or you're joining a corporation, or you're learning the value of diversity by working with other races and working with other political, other countries, where does that make sense? In Chicago, in New York, in Atlanta, in diverse urban environments in which those skill sets are going to come into the play. However, if you're living in rural Nebraska, or you're living in areas of the country that have not seen the same amount of economic impact of the changing technological society, you're going to be much less convinced that a college degree is going to make a difference, because you're going to look around at your community and says, in 20 years, we haven't improved. And ironically, it's the same type of community that's not going to have the same type of diversity or global political impact and so forth. So I see all these statistics and trends as being reinforcing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. You're not trying to avoid the political hot potato, though, and just go off on you, man, and take a circuitous route to take an easy way out on the politics.
I didn't know whether you wanted this to go from your college-bound kid to David Mark's political hour.
No, I don't want that either.
But I mean, the point is, there's been an explicit messaging on the part of one of these political parties that has been anti-education and anti-intellectual. And we know this. And I think that has had real reverberations. There's almost been an attack on the idea of higher learning.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think the way that the Republicans would frame it, colleges have become bastions of homogenous democratic thinking where conservative views are not tolerated. And there's a brainwashing of students, inculcating them with values that we don't feel are consistent with our values. I think that's how they would say it.
Okay.
And I think there's some, like, in some ways there's true, and in some ways it's not true. It is true that if you go to schools like Brown, Wesleyan Smith, Holyoke, Wellesley, just to name a few, you're not going to hear very many conservative voices. And to the point where, mostly what you'll get will be caricatures of that side. And people have a tendency to feel stifled because when you're such a distinct minority, you don't find that many people around you that have your views. A lot of times you'll go silent. That's why, having enough of a critical mass so that people feel at least, I'm not the only one holding my views, can be helpful, so that you actually get the best arguments from the other side, even if it's not going to change your thinking, if that makes any sense. So I think that would be their argument. And I think there's some truth to that. On the other hand, there's also an aspect of, as you become more educated and you learn things, you learn history. It's very difficult to learn history and to have a Tucker Carlson view that there's no racism. Yeah. Just putting it out there. Sorry, that may be political. I mean, I stepped on toes, but I'm just being honest.
On a really real level, we know that for many, many kids, going to college may be the first opportunity they have to even interact with a different racial or religious group. For many kids, they may have never interacted with an African American or someone with Mexican heritage or someone who's Jewish or someone who's Muslim or someone who's Asian, especially if you're coming from the heartland areas and the rural areas where you could have a school that's 99% of one race. And so much studies has shown that the thing that causes people to broaden their horizons more than anything else is simply the ability to interact with other people.
I agree.
Other being of any category, And I got to say this. I think that Republican Party has become so much of an attack on otherness, an attack on anything that threatens the traditional status quo, that they see all of education, higher education now, as being a threat because what higher education introduces to young kids, which is the tolerance for differences and the embracing of things that are new, is becoming an existential threat to the vision that the Republican Party is trying to propagate right now.
So I agree with that. So let's transition. Let's talk about the parent education divide. And I respect how you showed the continuity and the correlation between all of them. But let's just break it down. So people with a bachelor's degree, 66% of people with a bachelor's degree felt like they wanted their kid to go to a 4-year college. People without a bachelor's degree, 45% felt that way. So there's a 21% gap. That's significant. And I'll give you my theory on this, Dave, and then I'd like to hear your theory. So my theory is that those of us who have degrees we can see concrete ways in which our degree benefited us, not just as an enlightened human being or more enlightened than we were before we went to college, let's put it that way. Some of us are still trying to get enlightened, but we can see direct job benefits. Yeah. In fact, I know this would be true for you as well, Dave. I haven't had a single job since I've been, out of college that I would have had that I would have been able to get if I didn't have a degree.
Yep.
And so when we see tangible correlation between our degree and some life outcomes, we're going to value that. On the other hand, I think people that have not had a degree, there's a lot of cynicism about education, and there can be a lot of stereotypes that maybe there's partial truth in there, but some of it just comes from an unknown. You're living in a small town or rural America and you never went to college. You have certain views of college that you might find are very different if you actually went, but you're so far removed from them. So that's part of my theory on that. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, education gives you the ability to take a wider perspective, especially of change, and to see where things are going and to see how things can suddenly become obsolete. And education gives you, we often talk about this phrase, Mark, being a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
What education enables you to do is to develop the skill set to continually learn and change and adapt. I want to give you a great example. I was reading an article just yesterday, Mark, on how the auto industry is going to change because by 2030, 50% of all cars are going to be electric. By 2040, probably 100% of cars are going to be electric. And the problem is that the electric car has 10 times fewer parts than the internal combustion engine. So all those jobs, like 90% of jobs in actually building an internal combustion car, are eventually going to go away in the next 20 years to be replaced by more technologically advanced jobs of software integration as we look at how to integrate software with a very simple mechanical device, which is essentially an electric motor. Well, the fact is, being educated allows you to read those articles and say, hey, look, my industry's changing. And maybe I should get a certificate degree in software integration or coding or whatever, because if all I do is stay put making carburetors or making this widget, in 10 years, my job is going to be gone. So I think having an education allows you to recognize change, to adapt to it, to prepare for it. And that's why I think parents who have that education and have that broader viewpoint are a lot more amenable to their kids getting more educated. That lifelong learning proposition never goes away.
No, I think you're spot on. And on the racial divide, 67% of blacks want their kid to get a 4-year degree. If you go 56% Latino, 51% white. I think that's partly explained by the reverse of what I said before, just like those of us who have education have seen how that has led to job opportunities for us. The percentage of whites with college degrees is noticeably higher than the percentage of blacks right now. So I think what you have there is people that are also aware of my lack of education.
Yeah.
Has been an impediment. And if I would have had more, I might have had a better opportunity. And so there's an understanding of the value of it. I don't know if you agree or disagree on that, Dave.
Absolutely. If you're a minority and you don't have an education, you're dead in the water economically. A lot of times, if you grew up in rural areas and you had access to farms or traditional industries such as coal mining or forestry or so forth, you see a lot of examples, even today, where you can still sort of survive maybe without a high school degree. But if you're in inner city Chicago without a college degree and you don't have an education, you're unemployed, period. And not only that, you're not just unemployed, you're living in an area of poverty and crime. There's bullets flying overhead, literally. So you see the results of having a degree literally gets you out of a war zone and gives your family the chance to have a semblance of a normal life. Whereas without an education, you truly are stuck in dire straits.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing where sometimes Dave and I have a slightly different perspective. I don't. I mean, I think what you said there, I'm sure it pertains to Chicago, but where I'm at, I see a lot more of opportunities for people through. For example, we've got someone coming over here to lay sod this week, and then we also are in putting a sprinkler system in. Like I was talking to the sprinkler guy. He's out of high school. He started this. He was working for somebody else for a while. His business is so booming right now that he's literally 12 installs behind, and he's trying to hire people. So I do see a lot of jobs in trades still, and it does take a little bit of entrepreneurship, and not everybody has that ability to kind of launch out and try something like that because of fear of failure or the confidence to even do it. But I think your point is well taken, but I do think it can vary a little bit depending on where you're located, a little bit.
Yeah, and I want to dovetail on that. I'm actually having a trade is actually part of the education as well. So I want to.
Okay, if you include that, then we can agree.
Absolutely. In fact, even more so in Chicago, there's very little that you can't do without getting some sort of license or trade. So I don't know,
right, because
but certainly with
stuff.
You got it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's actually much harder to become a plumber in Chicago because of the apprenticeship and the course that you have to go through than a lot of college degrees. So the trades are part of the educational process.
All right, that's good. I'm glad you clarified that because I
Absolutely.
thought you were talking about 4-year degrees. So that's important.
No.
When you make it, when you broaden it, then we agree. Now I want to close, Dave, on this. So you mentioned this in your intro, and I'll read it. I'll read a exact quote from the article. It says, "Fueling the skepticism are legitimate gripes about 3 things: rising tuition, disappointing graduation rates at many colleges, and poor job prospects for some fields of study." And I say to all 3 of them, guilty as charged.
Yes.
Tuition is rising exponentially, higher than healthcare has been rising. We've talked about this before, Dave. It's hard to justify 4, 5, 6 years of your life, maybe some significant loans, obviously opportunity costs you could have had if you'd gone the trade route or done entrepreneurship or something, to then maybe have a coin flip of a chance of graduating 50% and less in some places. That's really difficult to justify.
And Mark, please clarify that statistic. I mean, what is, for all colleges now, what is the 4-year graduation rate generally?
It's in the 40s, Dave,
40. And I ask yourself the question, what other economic industry in this country could survive where 60% of its prospects fail to achieve the stated goals?
Well, literally, some people don't even, the statistics are quoted as 6-year now, just because 4 years. So, atypical in certain, depending on, of course, where you go and type of student and type of school. There certainly are schools with graduation rates in the 80s and even 90s for 4 years. But, and then the third point, is poor job prospects in certain fields. So the bottom line is, in general, colleges have to up their game. They have to up. It is on them. They've been able to go for decades with the assumption on the part of parents that I don't care what it costs, but my kid just has to get a college degree because, while this word may not have been used, it's almost the elixir that just stirs the straw that stirs the drink, that just makes everything happen in sort of an automatic type of way where it's just a foregone conclusion. And now that is being challenged, and it's being challenged with data. And this is actually a good thing. It's making colleges up their graduation rates. It's making them improve their career centers and start working with an employment plan from freshman year. And it's making colleges either freeze their tuition, in some cases even reduce it, or at least have incremental increases. And really look at your budgets and ask, okay, where's the pork that we can cut so that we don't have to keep having these exorbitant increases? And do we really need to continue to play the facilities race and all the other races that schools do where they're trying to compete with the Joneses? My competitor has XYZ. I need to have XYZ. That's going to add cost. We'll pass it on to the consumer. So I just want to acknowledge that while there's certainly some political undertones, not even undertones, really, it's really explicit in the article in terms of persuasions and perspectives, there's a legitimate point.
Yes.
For the skepticism, when you have these levels of rising tuition, in some cases, very disappointing graduation rates, and in some cases, poor job performance. Because America's education system is so diverse, we have to be so careful not to paint with one stroke of a brush, right? Because there are schools that offer incredible value for your money on cost. And there are schools with exceptional graduation rates. And there are schools with amazing career placements. And so I don't want to just, take one stroke of the brush and just indict everybody. But there's others. I mean, I had a family that reached out to me, someone I'm working with, and they said, Mark, I met such and such as a professor from a college. He made this place sound amazing. What do you think of this school? And I'm not going to mention the name. You can probably tell him being a Lagarde. I basically said the graduation rate is in the toilet. And so, buyer beware. Like, if you want to go there, maybe your child will be one of the ones that graduates. But something's wrong to have a graduation rate. And we're talking like, it was really low. So anyway, I've talked a lot. Any final comments you want to make before we wrap it up?
Yes, I just wanted to dovetail, Mark. Isn't this very similar to In the News that we did a couple weeks ago, where we talked about how many colleges are adapting to these realities?
Correct.
And there are some colleges, such as Parsons, that are saying, okay, let's not do a 4-year. We're going to give certificate programs. We're going to increase our online offerings. We're going to make our degrees far more relevant. Parsons School of Design. Hey, no one's doing design these days. It's all being offshore. But how about internet and TV and television and so forth? So they're offering certificate programs where people can learn real life skill sets in a short time in modes that are accessible to them, where they can actually address all of these things. It's less cost. People are getting their certificates, and they're improving their financial possibilities. And that was key to the colleges actually surviving in this demographic tsunami, or not surviving, their ability to address all the issues that you've raised.
No. Yeah, and I'm glad you ended on a positive note. There are a lot of colleges that see the writing on the wall, and they're really doing some real cutting edge things. We probably need to come back again in the next, certainly 6 months, Dave.
Yeah.
And probably run another and, find another article that discusses some of the really cool creative things that some of the colleges are doing to increase their value. Because there's some really, really creative thinking out there. And you're right. We did discuss that. So good stuff. Good stuff.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
Awesome.